Morning, everybody. This is wxlive.us, Webinar017, Saturday, March 31st, 2012. I know it's early morning, but Glenn is here to give us a high-level overview of the WX core features, and also to provide some training offerings that he has. And if you have questions, if you could possibly type that in the Skype chat, I will relay those to Glenn. And Glenn at the end of the class will tell you what you got, or maybe now, I don't know. So Glenn?
Well, good morning. I'm Glenn Rathke from Soft Design Consulting, and I offer consulting for the WINDEV family of products and also training. And we concluded our latest training last week. So I thought I'd give you a high-level overview of what WINDEV can do, and we can also briefly talk about WebDev if that arises during the training here. And I wanted to make available to you from my website at www.sdcdev.net the special training that we worked out with Arnold from WX Live. Through the weekend, I'm offering 25% off of our self-study course, which is actually the bottom listing here under WX Live. And for the next week, I'm offering 10% off of our training class in St. Louis. And so enough with that commercial. We can talk about it at the end if anybody's interested. So let me close out of this. We'll go over into WINDEV. In fact, I want to stop my application from running. What I wanted to do is talk at a high level of some of the functionality that we have within the IDE. For those of you who are not familiar with WINDEV at all, the different things that it can do. And I guess one of the first things I want to say is whether you have WINDEV, you have WebDev, or you have WINDEV Mobile, the IDE looks very similar. So once you really learn one, you've learned all three. And so we'll just start from left to right and go top to bottom and take a few minutes to show what you can do or different functionalities of WINDEV. We have our traditional file menu where you have access out to the outside world. We open projects. We can open a project from Source Code Manager. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, PCSoft has given us a repository where we can store our projects and all files related to the projects. We can check them out over the internet, and we can maintain history and call back any previous version that we've had. We can export to a directory, so if we need to use this in another project. We can import from other platforms that we're using. We can import another WINDEV complete project or individual screens. We can import from WebDev, and we can do the same type of thing, and we can import from WINDEV Mobile. That being said, when you do import from the other IDEs or platforms, it's not 100% great import, but it does give you a starting point, and at least all your code is there. Moving over, we have the traditional edit menu, and there's not much to talk about there. The next choice is our project menu, and there's quite a few things that we can do here. We actually will define our project over project description. And this is what we call the paradigm for WINDEV. They call it their 8-tab paradigm. I think maybe there's 10 here, I'm not sure. This is how we would describe every object that we've got in the projects. And so this is at the project level. We do a high-level view of what the project name is. We define where the analysis is. And for those of you moving from other products, perhaps Clarion, you're used to a data dictionary. We have an analysis which is very similar to that, where we import tables, we create tables, we have table and field definitions. We can also define where our data files are going to be if we're going to be using Hyperfile, which is the built-in SQL tables that PCSoft provides. We can also define when we're creating our windows, if we want to see live data at the time when we create a browse with a browsing table control, which is handy because then you can see if you've got enough rows and got enough columns at design time. Moving down further, we can actually define multiple languages in a project without having to use any external tools for maintaining the language. We can just add them from here. And you can see we have a fairly substantial list of what we can select and put in the project. As you do that and you put each control on the screen, there's where you actually define what the captions would appear in each language to the user. There are products that PCSoft has, I think it's WD-int and WD-message, where you can maintain the translations external to the program. So if you don't want to take time for doing translations, export all your captions, give them to somebody who can do the translation, and then import them back in. We have a style tab where we can define what the project will look like when we create it, and they offer us a few different skins. Let me drop through these and show what these look like. And now I'm just freezing, and why I don't know I'm freezing. Well, that's embarrassing because that hardly ever happens, but it sure has happened now.
Well, it could be because you're connected on
It could be, and
remotely.
I had McAfee going before, and I just wanted to take that down. So let me just see if I can stop this, and we'll get back into WINDEV here.
Yeah, there it is. Down one.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks. Start this. Okay, well, sorry about that. I will probably freeze maybe once a month. It doesn't happen often, and unfortunately, it happens at the inopportune times. I will open without recompiling right now. Okay, so let's go back and look at the project level. We were looking at the languages and scrolling through there, and then we did styles, where you can actually define what you want your skin to look like for the project. Here's our source code manager that we talked about before, and we can define whether we want to use SCM or not to use SCM. My way of thinking is you should always use source code manager. It is a great way to share the files, plus if you have it on a server, it's a great way to back up your entire project. We have options within here where we can specify, and what I'm looking at in particular here is a programming charter, and we can actually define what elements we want of the project, how we're going to define them, how we want the window controls to be referenced, as in a button would be a prefix of BTN, how we want page controls to be referenced, report controls, and you know, the one that you use the most is the type of variables. And we actually can discuss quickly here from the next tab the scope of variables that we talk about. We have global variables that we have available to us from the whole project. PCSoft also has a variable that's available at the top of the window or page, and again, they call those as global, but that's just global to that form or page, which means every control in there has use of it. And then we also have the scope of the variable that's either within a procedure or within a button or a control, and you only use it there. So it's similar to most other languages, but we do define our scopes and how we want to have the prefix defined here. We have some advanced options where we can actually use have user macro code. And if we enable this, what that lets us do is on a page, if a user has shortcuts that they always do this button, this button, this button, or a button and some text, they can define that in a macro and call it at runtime. We can also talk about the menu in AF, which actually gives us some assisted hints and inputs and functionality, such as at the top of a browse menu, we can export records to Excel without programming. We just turn this feature on, and it's available to us. We
Whoa.
can. Yes.
What is it? Automatic what? Application features.
Yes.
So can you create your own, or it's just these 5?
It's those 5. Yeah, it's those that I know of. It's those 5. I've really not bothered to go in and do that. or create new ones. However, you could create a pop-up menu for a different control and add functionality in there.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
We talk about how we want to compile the project, if we want it to be strict or not, and if we want it to honor settings back from WINDEV 1.5, which actually brings up a good point in that PCSoft does a tremendous job of trying to maintain backward compatibility from when they add new features. There aren't many software packages that I've seen that actually break very, very, very little existing code. So that's how we define projects at a high level. And of course, as you create a new project, it will step you through that process screen by screen and give you some defaults. So it's rather easy to start a new project. From the project menu, we also have list of elements in the project, so you can see everything that's included in there. We have a project dashboard, which is actually what's showing in the background here. My way of thinking, from just a 1, 2, 3 developer context, there's a lot of information here. Maybe too much, but that's up to the user. But where it really, the developer actually, where it really comes in handy is if you're in a larger project and you have a project manager. They can actually get a handle on the entire project from here. And this module can run independently of WINDEV, so there's no license needed, no dongle needed, nothing needed for running this. We also have, we can print out the project documentation. And there's a layout of the documentation, and you can print it either to PDF, you can preview it, and you can decide what you want in the project. But you can actually take a very small project, print all the documentation, and it becomes quite impressive of everything you can have in there. We also have time management. Well, and when you turn that on, what it does is it will keep track of the time that that particular developer who's logged in is got that window open and working on it. So at the end of a project, you can go back and say, oh, it took 5 days for this window or 1 day for this window, and kind of get a good feeling of how long it took to do that project. It's really nice when you compare against what your project specs called for and what you've estimated. It's also handy to go back and say, oh, an average window takes 1 day or 5 days or 6 days. And when you do estimating in the future, you can base off of the values that it comes back. We can set up configurations for a project, and particular need possibly is if you've got things that are special for 64-bit or 32-bit, we can actually make a configuration just for that, and then we could do conditional compiling, or we could actually have just specific screens for whatever your configuration would happen to be. Again, we're back at the programming charter, and this brings up a point that PCSoft gives you many ways of getting to the same piece of functionality. We were able to do it within the project description. We can do it from here too. PCSoft gives us the use of business rules, but their implementation of business rules is pretty much just a reminder of any time that you have some functionality that you're creating and you define the form that it's attached to. If you make a change, it lets you know you need to go back and change the code on that form. It's not an implementation of a business rule that acts upon any logic within a program. It's really a reminder for you. We have an addition audit where we can actually find out how much dead code we have, if we have any orphaned elements, if we have any, we can have a list of disabled errors that we've decided to turn off. Just many things in the addition audit. We have a performance profiler, which is really cool because we can either analyze performance for complete application, or if we have an area that we think is running slowly, we can just turn the profiler on, and then when we exit that procedure or window or wherever we would define that, we can turn the profiler off. And it will give us a reading of every procedure that was called and maybe every loop that we have there and how many times something was called within a loop. So it's possible you're running a loop 5,000 times and you find there was a single line of code that didn't need to be in the loop. It could be outside of the loop. And so then you can see how you could drastically increase performance just by looking at your profiler. We have a place for project code, and that's the area where you would define global variables for a complete project. or any housekeeping that you need to do as you initialize the project. We can
Is that,
recompile.
excuse me, Glenn? When you
Yes.
say global, is that just global variables or global classes or?
Now this would, in the project code, they would just be global variables and any
Okay.
code that you're running in there. And at that point, you could call other modules or procedures if you want, but referencing your global classes or your global procedures, we actually have a code window where we can do that. But
Okay.
project code, that's just what runs when the project starts.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yep. We can recompile the project at any point in time. We can tell it how we want to do a test mode in the project. And you see we have a debug the project and loaded debugging dump. What's really nice in WINDEV is we have a full debugger. And we could look at that later as we single step through code. We can see the variables, not only in a tooltip, but we can see the variables as they change within the debugger. And it's very handy. In other actions, we've got a menu here where we can actually synchronize templates. So if we have templates that we've made changes to and we want to filter that all the way down to all of the pages, we can redo that by synchronizing. We could also take a skin and apply that to a complete that skin to the entire project for all the windows. We can refresh the style in skin, and we can also repair the project. In case we're having some functionality that we've just added a new query or added a variable and for some reason it's not refreshed within the project as we're working, I would just go there and just repair the project. And all that really means is it's going to go through and look at every query, every window that we have and just refresh it so it has the latest elements in the project tree. We can explore the project directory and we can also load the analysis. And as I said before, the analysis is just our data dictionary. So let me take just a really quick look at what an analysis looks like, just so you say we have our table definitions. And let me check that out of Source Code Manager. So here we have the people table, and we have a phones table, and we have a link between the two, so we can define a referential integrity here. And if you notice, we can also define a different connection. The tables in brown are hyperfile SQL, and the tables in blue are external access, either as a native driver or as OLEDB. And then within each table, we can actually define the attributes for each field, and we can define what kind of type it is. We can give it a caption, and we can give it a size. So anyway, I just wanted to quickly show you what the analysis looks like. We can get into that later if we have time. Let me close the analysis. And if we go to the next menu choice is we have a workshop. And we can actually do a full RAD of an application. We will select the analysis that we have, and it will go through and build browse tables and maintenance forms. And it will build the complete application for us. Very similar to what we have in Clarion, but I think, quite frankly, not quite as robust as their generator, but this still generates very nice code. The next option we have is generating RAD patterns, and I find this could be very helpful if you put enough time into this or at a large corporate level, that you can actually create your own templates. So whenever you're creating or generating an application, you'd always have the same look and feel. You could embed code in there, so every time you generate a browse window, it would have the same window look and feel, the same browse look and feel, and the same code for accessing data. We have configure user groupware, which is really kind of nice in that you can assign groupware to a complete project where it will give you the interface for maintaining users and groups and what forms they can get to, what windows they can get to, what controls that can be seen. And this is all done, provided by PCSoft.
Does that include a login too, or it's just the back end of the?
No, that's a good question. It does provide the login, and I believe as you first get in, it's probably admin, and then you can go and add users and groups for that particular project. Now, the definition of the tables are not imported into the analysis. You don't have use of those right off the bat, but you can bring them in, and you could add additional functionality to the groupware. It's pretty powerful. So right off the bat, it works nicely, and you can customize that.
Glenn, I have a question on that. So
Yes.
if I pull that into my analysis, does
Yes.
that mean all of a sudden I've given up the power of groupware itself and have to take it over? Or does that make sense?
You've not given up any power. It's just that you're able to now, if you want to.
Or I have more responsibility? I mean,
No,
it's okay.
not
So
really.
it's still the regular groupware. It's just that it's part of your analysis now. Oh,
Correct, because now you could take another table. You have a user table, and you want to link some other data to it. Create a new
hmm
table and just link them.
okay. So it gives you more capabilities. Okay,
It
thank you.
it does. Right. We have UML modeling, and quite frankly, I've never implemented UML modeling within a project, so I really can't comment on that. Executables, as you can see, we can generate a 32-bit or a 64-bit, or we can actually do a Linux console executable. We have services. We can do Windows services, again in 32 or 64, or we can create a Linux daemon. We can generate a library. We can create a patch. So when we have an update, we don't have to create a complete update or setup for the user. We can implement the patch within a setup. We can define and create external components, which are handy when you want to distribute some kind of
Glenn,
Glenn, stop for a second. I think the internet has reduced your voice. Excuse everybody. If you have questions, if you could type it into the Skype chat or write it down at the end, you can give it to me. But Glenn?
I'm here.
Okay, there's something going on with your connection.
Okay. I mean, it's my connection.
Yeah, you're the only one that mics up besides me, so something going on with the connection because it sounds like something's going on in the background.
And actually, I hear it on my speaker.
Oh, you do?
I do.
Oh, so okay.
It's gone.
Wow. Oh, it's back.
can you hear me?
Who is that?
I am Paulo.
Oh, you gotta
I
turn
have
that off.
one question about the groupware.
Okay, Paulo, can you write it down in Skype or wait to the end because it's not really. I have to turn you off. Oh boy, sorry about that. I didn't realize that opened him up.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry about that. That was
That,
my fault.
not a problem. That's what happens when you go live. We're talking about external components, and this is a great feature that they've included, that if you need to have functionality that you want to distribute to users, whether it's a paid functionality or you just distribute it, kind of like an open project to somebody. A perfect example would be if you had somebody who could develop a QuickBooks interface, and they would develop that as an external component, and you could either purchase that from them or get that. Or if you had a query by example, you could just drop that in your project and you have use of that. We have internal components which are similar, but they're actually within the project itself, and they're not easily distributable as an external component would be. We have web services. We can generate a web service from the project, which is really cool in that we really don't need web dev to create web services. We can do them right here. We can import the web services that are existing. We can work with .NET. We can import an assembly, we can import a DLL, and as you import a DLL, it gives you all the embed points or all the procedure points within that DLL to make your calls to. It's very simple. You just import it and it's in your project tree. We can generate a Java application, an archive from our project that we're working with. We could create an RPC server and distribute it as such. We can work with SAP, and I believe those are the BPI functions for native access to their data. We have a software factory where we can generate and deploy our application. We can do multiple compiles in there. We could run other external applications. It's just like if you had to create software and include files and run functionality, you can actually automate that process. We can create a batch, open a batch if we need to do a smaller subset like from the software factory where we're just going to batch things together. We can search on projects, we can do multiple generations, and we can create the setup. This is an important one here is because you do not need to have a third-party tool to create the setups if you don't want. It will create the EXE or it will create an MSI for you. But what's really cool is PCSoft actually gives you the setup as an application file. So you're free to load it as a project, private brand it, do whatever you need to do, add additional functionality, and then that becomes your own private setup application. We have Source Code Manager, where we could be the administrator and do functionality within Source Code Manager. And in fact, let me just open that up. Here's what SCM looks like on my server, and I have my project open. So we have all these are windows that we have open or available to us. Here's some more Windows updates, Windows themselves, and just at the project level. And we can include other folders within the project or even outside of the project. We can include graphics within here. And PCSoft has made it so when you open up a window, you automatically check it out if you want to work on it. It's a very handy feature. We can open. Yes.
In the SCM, so does it mean that WINDEV is not like clearing, it's not binary stuff, it's actual files that's checked in and checked out?
They are actual files. Every single element in there, at least down to the window level, is a file. So you'll have a file for the project itself, which declares what everything's in there. You have a file for each window, a file for each report, for each query, and for each of your modules, whether they're classes or they're going to be global procedures or functions.
And you can access these files from the outside of this IDE also then? I guess you could.
You'd have to know what the password is because it's stored in a hyperfile database on a hyperfile classics or a hyperfile client server, and each of those tables that the information stored in is password protected. So even though they are separate files, they're stored in the database in a database.
Okay, gotcha.
So if you were to, you'd have to have the password, plus you probably would maybe do a web interface, but without being able to access the tables, it doesn't do you too much good.
Okay, so it's files, but not really in the real world.
They're files on the local computer, and they're in the database as records on the server.
Thank you.
And so what happens is you open from Source Code Manager the first time, and it brings down all those individual files and puts them on the user's computer. And until you actually going to check them out to use them, they're all in read-only attribute. And so once you say, yes, I want to use that file, it removes the read-only attribute. It puts the check up in the source code manager to say somebody's using it. And then when you check it back in, it will save it on your local desktop. It will then put the file back up into the server and make sure that it's the latest version. And then it will make your copy read-only again. And it handles all that stuff pretty well behind the scenes. If we have a central repository that we want to store multiple files or whatever we're storing up there, we can actually import an element from an SCM, even if it's in a different project. And that becomes handy if you use a login screen for every single project. Why not just keep it up there and import it? Or if you have a component that you want to use, just put up there in Source Code Manager and bring it down. So Source Code Manager not only works with your project, but any other type of project. And it also implements well, besides WINDEV, it does WebDev and WINDEV Mobile. And if I go back to the administrator, you can also see that I have projects under WebDev, and then here's for mobile, and then here's the WINDEV projects. And actually, let me open this up, and if I have anything checked out, well, which I do here, you can actually see in red that I've got the analysis open, or the project open, excuse me, and that it's on version 11, and that I'm the user GR, and where it's checked out into in my local computer. One of the nice things about Source Code Manager, let me just go back in here just so we can see it. If I would select a file and right click it, I can get the history of the file, and then I could go back and I could roll back to any previous version that we've saved in Source Code Manager. Okay. So I think that's probably enough for Source Code Manager. We can cover some of that in the training class, but it's at a higher level view because it needs to be set up on a Hyperfile client server database, which means port 4900 just needs to be opened if you want to access it from the outside. PCSoft has also implemented automatic tests where you can create a script based on any action that you're running through in the application. So it will trap all your mouse clicks, all your tab movements, all your data entry into forms, anything that you want to do, and it will create a script for you. And then you can go back and select the script and rerun it at any time, any later time. So this is great for regression testing. If you've had a nice script created and you need to go back and see, has anything else, did my changes break anything that I had previously coded? Comes in very handy. We have a traditional insert menu, and when you're on a form or a window, you can actually, here we can do a new window, and when you're on a window, we can insert new controls. We can also go over to a display, whether we want to do global procedures, and actually, let me select that. Here's where, getting back to what you had asked, Arnold, about the project code with our global variables there. Here's where we declare if we have global procedures or functions. If you look down in the bottom of my window, I've got global procedures, local procedures, and classes. And so these are separate files by themselves. And then within global procedures, you can actually create a set of procedures. And I have two here. And it's got the actual procedure within that whole file. Let's see, if we go to, let me just go to a window, make sure we're going to be open. Okay. And now when the context of a window and we're doing inserting, now you can see where we can do just the controls. We have a Windows menu, and we can define tab orders for specific controls or group of controls. We can define the initialization order. We can define if we're going to have a main menu or if the window's going to have a pop-up menu. So there's quite a few things we can do just at the window level. We have a control menu, and we can actually take a control and refactor it. We could take a list box and refactor it to a combo box. We can just transform controls, a table to a looper, because that becomes handy without having to recode it, rewrite it, redesign it. We can just change it. We have a code menu, and we can look at the window code, and it tells you what the shortcuts are, and it would just take you directly to the code for that window. We have a display menu where we can show the window in 3D, and then we can rotate it and we can see the different layers that are in the window itself. If we have planes, which are just virtual containers on or layers on a window, we can go there. You can see we can change our zoom level so we can see the screen larger, the window larger. We can define the toolbars. We can put rulers on there. We can put grids on there. Many things we can do with how we're going to display within the IDE. We have a ton of tools available to us. We have a Hyperfile SQL Control Center. We have a project monitoring center, a control center, and all these tools are pretty much external to the IDE itself, and so they're actual applications in there. We have a custom menu choice, which is really kind of cool, and sometimes what I'll do is if I'm doing a lot of SQL work, I'll add the SQL Manager to the toolbar here, so I don't have to exit the program to go run something else. Or if you use Notepad a lot for doing whatever you're doing, or Calculator, add that to a menu choice and you can call that up within the application, within the IDE. Then we have a traditional window menu, whether we're going to cascade them or horizontal tile them. It's really more of a Windows functionality as opposed to the IDE. And then we have the help menu, and here's where you would usually launch help or request for help to the hotline. And if you say request a technical support, it steps you through with a wizard, and you can request free support to them. And quite frankly, I've gotten good response from them. I don't know if they have a stated time of how long it takes to get answers back. I've had answers back anywhere as quickly as 15 minutes up to 2 days. And even being free at 2 days, I'm fine with that, even if it took 3 days. Because if you needed something, you could expedite it and actually pay for support, I believe. Their free support is really pretty adequate. So that's pretty much at the high level what you can do with the IDE. We have toolbars across the top, and all these are pretty much configurable as to what you want to show and work with within the IDE. So it's highly customizable. And as I had said at the top of the program, is that the IDE for WINDEV, WebDev, and WINDEV Mobile are all similar. So once you learn one, you've really learned all three. And actually, once you learn the language in one of them, for the most part, you've become proficient in the other two also. So the class that we offer right now is based on WINDEV, and I think easily over 95% of what you learn in the class is also pertains to WebDev and WINDEV Mobile. So that being said, before I move on, are there any questions, Arnold?
I don't see one. I know Paulo has one, but I'm afraid I don't want to turn that passing truck or the compact or whatever it was back on.
Okay. Well, maybe we can.
I can throw a chat out here. Let's see if anybody has. Let me clear the chat. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and type it in here. No questions. Let's see. So this 2 questions, okay. While he's typing his let's see. Okay, he's going to type it out. Okay. So that Project Explorer on the right side.
Yes.
Did that appear when you pick something, or is it up there all the time?
Well, no, it's not up there all the time, although I think you would want to configure it to be there all the time. And that's one of those things that we can actually go to Tools, Options in the environment, and we can define what we want to see and highly customize this for each user. Or if you have multiple monitors, maybe on a configuration, you want to see more items within the application, which brings up a point. We can you define your windows or your toolbars that you want to see, and we can define a configuration to be saved, configuration 1 through 4, and at any point we could call on them up or switch between configurations. But if I wanted the project tree that we have there. Actually, that's Project Explorer that I'm highlighting right down here. Turn that on or turn it off. Oh, gotcha. And then within the context of that, if you notice down here where I've got, I'm on a magnifying glass, it's at the bottom of the Project Explorer. And now I hit
right
the analysis and a dictionary. You can put more functionality and more tabs in there.
Yeah, I noticed that it's pretty configurable. It seems like you can hide stuff and show
Yeah.
only what you want.
And also
Uh,
what's nice is when you're in the IDE, if you really want to hide those windows temporarily as you're working, if you do Control W, now that gives you all the desktop space to work while you're designing.
Sweet.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, here's his questions. Paulo asks, for the groupware,
Yes.
what database is used? Is that Hyperfile or
It is Hyperfile.
whatever you're using?
Yeah. No, it is Hyperfile, and they don't give you. I don't believe they give you the choice to use it outside of Hyperfile, but I'm just wondering if there's a workaround for that if somebody wanted to do it in SQL, because we have an HCreation if not found statement that says whatever your current connection is for your database, go ahead and create tables based on that. So I'm just wondering if it would create them in SQL and we could switch it with behind the scenes.
Well, you did mention that you could import the groupware data analysis in, right? So if
Yes.
you import it in, you would import it in as Hyperfile or the SQL of your choice.
Yeah, no, you'd bring it in as Hyperfile because you wouldn't want to lose the functionality that is there. But because you can do HCreation if not found and swap out a connection at runtime, you could actually be pointing to a different database. And I just don't have a complete yes answer that I can say, yes, we can use it in something else. We'd have to try it.
Okay.
Natively, they're supporting Hyperfile.
Let's see. Brian says a default login. Oh yeah, supervisor. Thank you, Brian.
Yes,
And if you're doing the tutorials, that is helpful.
yes, it is.
Let's see, Pablo, and the ID to Skype chat. Can somebody go add him? Put your Skype chat, and somebody will add you to the group, please. Do you know anybody in our list? Anyway, that's a good time to talk about this. Yeah, let me put that in Skype and let somebody take care of that for him.
Okay.
Okay. We have a Skype chat that I call WX English, but it's the English speaking one that Andy Stapleton started a long time ago. And I can't remember what the best way to do is try and get a hold of one of us that's already in there. That's a hard way to do it, but get invited. I think someday I will post something on how to get access to it, but if somebody can invite Paulo, that'd be great. Okay, you want to be I don't see any other questions either on Skype or in our little chat here. Okay. So do you want to move on to your next things?
Sure. What I'd like to do is show at a high level the functionality within the examples that we use in our class because it will highlight what you can do with WINDEV. And so what we'll do is just show you functionality, then we can look and see how some of it's been created. So let me run the application. Although, if I remember right, I didn't recompile it, so I don't know if that's going to be an issue later. Let's go to the biggest thing that we teach in the class is data access because there's so many different ways, and some of it gets to be confusing, at least in the beginning, or you don't get a handle on it. We do data access where you're just looking at data in a table, or we want to put a filter on it, or we want to put a query on it, or we want to fill a table by programming. So let's just take a quick look at some of these. And in its simplest form, this is a table that's just showing data. No filtering, it only has those few records that are in there. But during the class, we'll go through the 8-tab design and show you what the table looks like. And we'll look at that shortly, perhaps. But what I want to do is that we move from simple to complex because now we have the same table, and now we show how you actually put a filter on it. And so if I want to filter by the last name, it will return just those records. We talk about those, how we filter the code, how we add a first custom row in a combo box. As you can see, it says select an occupation. We also talk about how you can actually add a report on the screen without even having to code it. It's just automatically generated. And actually that report looks just like this. So by dropping a control on our browse window, it creates a report for us, which is actually pretty swift. That's pretty nice. We move from filtering of data down to using queries. And again, this looks the same, but the difference is now instead of using an HFilter, we will use a graphical query that we save in our project tree. So where that becomes handy is when you actually have querying that you need to provide in several different windows, you don't have to recode the query or the SQL statement. You just reuse a query.
But by the way, Glenn, I
Yes.
wanted to let everybody know that the examples he's showing is stuff he uses in his class with instructions, and he walks through these things, and they're great examples as any kind of starting app. So it's really handy.
Thank you. The examples probably have evolved over a 3-year period in time, and I continue to add to them as I see a need or update things, which brings up the point that in the training that we offer, even down to the self-study, is the first year of updates is included. We move from just data access to where we can actually build a table on the fly. So here I have a table without any, well, one column, but it's not defined to any database. So if I do a select statement, whether it's against one table or multiple tables, I can bring back those records and have it create our table structure dynamically for us, which is pretty cool because we'll extend that functionality later, in fact, in a few minutes, and see some practical uses for that. We have SQL specific, and thanks to Andy Stapleton for this. He was working on a project that had over 900,000 records, and what he wanted to do is provide the filling of the table at runtime, but in the background, so at any point the user would say, oh, I've got enough data, I can now stop filling the table. Or if you've got the 900,000 records, you don't have to wait for all of them to be loaded. So if we do start, and I'm running OLEDB, so you saw that it took, I don't know, a couple seconds to retrieve the records, but it brought up back the first 100. And now if you notice next to the pause button, every 5 seconds we're incrementing by 50 records. If we were doing a native driver, it would have been in under a second. So, and I can't sing the praises highly enough of PCSoft's native drivers because they implement them extremely well. And native drivers also will let you import views into your analysis. So if you're using SQL and you use views quite a bit, you can import them. I can pause this, and now the record retrieval is stopped. And of course, we go through that in class of how you would craft something like that. We have a query by example that people take out of this class with them, and they are free to use these in any of their own applications. As where we had previously created that HFilter up top, where you put the fields and then you create source code for filtering that, I actually have provide a floating window that interrogates this, and let's go back here, that interrogates this browse, and every column that's in this browse control that is linked back to the analysis will show up in the QBE, and then you can just build your statement, and it will execute and find what we need to do. If I say done, I have the choice of saving this as a query to reuse later. So right now, let's just say do not save. It filters my records. If I go back in, I can actually select a previously saved filter, and we'll edit that. It comes back and it refills in your QBE, so you can make changes to it if you like, and then we will just filter records again. And of course, that didn't return anything because that's how the parameter was set up. So we talk about QBEs, how to implement that, but within the QBE, we talk about indirection. And indirection is really a neat feature in that you can refer to any other control or property without even having to know the name of that control or that column. It's kind of like, I think, a who, what, when, or who, what, where. And so we can interrogate columns, we can interrogate an analysis and find out how many tables we have. Once we have a table, we can find out the columns that we have in there. Once we find out the columns, we can find if they're linked anywhere. We have a super control, and a super control is basically a bunch of controls that you would put together for like functionality and contain them within one control. And so you would take that from one form to another. And so say you had, for some reason, you had on several different windows that you're going to be working with people's last name, first name, occupation, and likes. Rather than have to put that in every single form and put those 4 fields out there and whatever else functionality you want, you could put them in one single control. Drag that control on your page or window and use it. We also have table highlighting, and we talk about that. I'm not sure why there's not data there, so let me check. Okay, I'm going to switch my connection from SQL to Hyperfile. And if you, what I've now done is I've just made a change to an ini file. So at runtime, it will actually use a different database. So which is really kind of cool because you can swap out at runtime the different backends or different databases or different servers. So what we can do in a table is we can either highlight a row or we can highlight a cell. And if you take a look at the table, I've just highlighted Mike Ahrens and I just unhighlighted him. We'll look at the code for that because it's pretty simple. But as in the keeping with the training, as we move from something simple to something more complex. And so now we have a table here that's highlighted. But if you look on the right-hand side, we now have code that can be entered by a user, an administrator, or stored in a database. And that's where this happens to be stored. And so we have something called a dynamic compile, and it just uses the compile keyword. And whatever we can write or store W language, we can actually run that at runtime. It will compile it. It will create a virtual procedure for us or function, and then we can just call that. And so if you take a look here, I'm actually defining the colors, and what I want to do is I want to make this a color that's non-existent. I'm just going to put an X in front of it. I'm going to save it, and this is just as if I were getting it from the database. I'm going to compile it and run it, and if you saw, the business owner now was deselected in color. If I go back and get rid of this X, so now it is a meaningful color, and save it, and I run it, our business owner is highlighted again. So this is really cool in that when I had talked about before that PCSoft's implementation of business rules is pretty much just a reminder to the developer of what has to be changed. We can actually write our own business rules that act upon specific conditions, and we could actually tie it just to a field in a table, and then any window that would have that field would automatically apply a business rule, and we'll look at that in just a few minutes. So the thing to take away from here is we have use of compile. And compile basically will go through, we'll compile it, it'll tell you if there's errors, and if there aren't any errors, it's successful. Then once that's done, we can actually run that. Here's our dynamic business rules. And so what I want to show you is if we go to this maintenance form, you'll notice that L name and F name are highlighted with a yellow background. I'm not doing that through code at all within this form. This is a saved rule that I've created, and I'll show you that in a minute. It's just W language code. And I've also made this to be a required field in the business rule. And so if I do OK, it says L name's required. Well, if you notice, the caption is L name, and the field in the table is actually L underscore name. So this implementation of business rules is smart enough to know, oh, what does the user actually see the field as? And we use that and display it. This is another takeaway from the training class, is how to create the business rules. In fact, you get the whole module, and you're free to implement this in your own applications. Let's look at how you create business rules, and I want to do the L name. And what we've seen before in the BuildBrowseTable, we actually have indirection, and through indirection I'm able to go not only indirection but HList item and HList file. I can go to the analysis and I can find every single table that I have available to me. So I could select people, and then if I want to say I want their last name to be required, I just use the required checkbox here and I move it over with this button. Okay, and it's this code here, and that's the visual effect that I have is black on yellow. And if I actually wanted to change that, I could change that right here. And so that's what the user would see. And then here's the code. Now, we provided the template just whether you capitalize it or you make it required. But the point here is this can be any W language code. So you really do have to be careful of what you allow users or admin to put in here, because you wouldn't want them to delete records. And actually, I just check for a delete statement or anything else that I don't want them to do. But you can code anything in here. I mean, technically, you could code a complete WINDEV application and store it and then run this in here. So it becomes very, very powerful. And again, as I said, that's a takeaway. So, and to implement something like that, really it takes one line of code, which is to display the yellow or the colored background. If you can see, it says to highlight required fields. You just call this one function that I have, actually this one procedure, SDCFV display iMagnet. One line of code to call it. And then when you're validating your records, if you want to make something required, it's just one line of code again. If not, SDCFV OK. So it's just a really good example of indirection, dynamic compiling, and HList file, HList item. We also, let's see, that's okay. Now we move to planes and internal windows. And planes are basically just layers on top of a window. And so whatever's on plane 0 always shows up, and anything that you swap through or switch through the other planes, they overlay plane 0. So in this example, my plane 0 and the next button are on the plane 0. So as I move through to plane 1, plane 2, plane 3, you can still see plane 0's visible, the next button is visible, and the previous button, which I actually had hidden. And so all I'm doing is I'm just swapping out planes at runtime. So it becomes very handy for creating wizards. We also have internal windows, and so we have a parent window, and we just swap windows in and out. So they behave like a plane, but they're separate windows. And so where that becomes handy is if you have 5 different internal windows, you could have 5 different developers working on it. Each one has their own functionality by their own developer. And then you just swap those out at runtime. But as opposed to plane 0 that always showed up in the bottom, we're swapping out entire windows within a internal window control. We also talk about control templates, and this is kind of nice because we're implementing this. And by the way, an addition to the examples will be a shell application. So in that application, you'll have a browse, and you'll have business rules, and you have query by example, and you'll have a template. So there'll be like 3-4 windows. And what you could do is start a project based on that, and all you have to do is bring your own tables into the analysis and craft your browses based on the one that's in the sample app. So it probably will give you a couple hours head start from starting from scratch. What a control template does, getting back to that topic, is a control template is and for those who come from the Clarion world, is you have functionality within a template, you fill out a few prompts, and it generates what you're working with. Whether to control or there's code behind the scene, it just gets embedded within your application. Here, I'll take functionality that I'll want to use many times over, and the example would be the add, edit, and delete buttons. So I'll just create a control template based on those 3 or 4 buttons on the screen. I can then drag them onto a form, set 2 lines of code, and never have to worry about my add and edit buttons. They'll know which maintenance forms to call up. So even though the examples all look the same, they're implementing different functionalities. We also, let me go back to that as we do the CRUD buttons. We edit that. The OK and cancel buttons, they're also control templates. So once you have your validation down to however you're going to handle it, and it's in a control template, you just drag them onto your maintenance forms. No more coding that. You just set 1 or 2 variables, and that's all you need to do. We in the class we also talk about different types of arrays. We have static arrays, and when we use them dynamically, we also have associative. Let me see, arrays. Nope, I didn't put that out there for the associative, but we also cover associative, which is basically a named pair type of array. We also show MDI parent and child windows. Whether you want to program that way or not, but at least we show how to do it. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is just go back and give the overview of how we code some of these things. Yes, they're in the examples, and they give you a heads up, but it's W language code, and so once you learn how to do data access, you're doing an application rather quickly. But what I want to show is just a table browse, and this is a table in its simplest form. And remember when we looked at the project description, we had the 8 tab paradigm. We have the same thing here now for a table control. We define a table at its highest level. We have the general tab, we have the GUI tab, where we talk about or show whether the table itself is visible or editable. We talk about the details, what kind of scroll bar do we want? Do we want it to wrap with entering? Do we want tooltips on it? We also have links, but that would pertain to a column. So any column in a table can be linked back to a field within the content of the field where we define the table that we're using or the query and what we want to be returned from the table control. And by the way, the description of each of these tabs and what they're used for and how you step through them, that's all in the manual that pertains to the examples also. We have a tab for a note, and that's pretty much working storage. So you can put in there whatever you'd like to store. You could have default values and then call them at runtime. It's up to your imagination what you want to use that for. As
you're
such,
talking about, Glenn, you're talking about your class manual, not the.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I have whether it's the St. Louis training class all the way down to just the self-study includes a 300+ page manual. Sounds like a lot of pages. The majority of them are screenshots, but we talk about different areas on the screenshots. We have a help window, and depending on the languages you have, you will see that for each language. So you can actually put in something for the tooltip or the text of the status bar or the title of the help window. And again, that'll be for on a language by language basis. We also can work on the style of the browse. And this pertains to the window, pertains to any control. They all have their own styles. And then we can modify all these different elements within that style. So we could change the title, we could change the outside border, the inside border, you name it, we can change it. The couple important things here is the table control is where we define the table that we're going to be using for our data source. And it can either be filled by programming, by a variable, or by a file or a query. And we can make it loaded in memory, so a memory table, or we can do direct access. And really, everything that we've discussed here, I can't think of an exception really. Everything that we've discussed here and shown how you look at the property support is also in WINDEV mobile and WebDev. If we go from a very simple before I move on to that, we also talk here of when we create procedures and functions, how we pass arguments to it, whether they're going to be by reference or by value, and whether they're going to be a default value or not. I want to show the HFilter because this is the first one where we actually were doing some coding to retrieve records. And if you notice, what I do is I just interrogate the controls that are on the screen. I have a field or a control called edit L name, and I have one called combo occupation. And I just go through and I build pretty much just what a where clause is. And then we deactivate a filter. So any filter that we had previously defined is now disabled because otherwise the data will become more exclusive. It just drills down. And then I just actually call the HFilter. We have the same kind of functionality in queries. And again, this window looks very similar. But if we look at the content, that is now based on a query. And if I look at the initialization of the table, instead of all the code that I showed for building the HFilter, we actually can just do that with parameters in a query. And we discussed that in class on how to extend that, how to create parameters, how to have multiple parameters for the same field, how to dynamically change those at runtime also. We also talk about the tables, and rather than have a content that's a table or a query defined on that content tab, we actually do this through code. And if we look at initialization of the table, that's what we do and what we teach. And we can actually show out if we're using Hyperfile for one type of data or SQL Server for another, the changes that we can make, and they're so very minimal, it's really easy to switch between the two. We also have joined tables, so there's two of them that we can show here. I have a one-to-one relationship between people and states, and here people, we're storing the two-digit state, MO for Missouri, TN for Texas. I'm linking to another file via that two-digit code out to the state table and returning just that state itself. And so we show how we link those two together in the course. But then again, this is a WINDEV feature, and it's actually pretty simple to do this. You go on the link tab, and you link your tables here and your fields, and you show what to display. We also have how you show a one-to-many relationship as if you had people and phones. So when you select a person, you'll see that the phones table on the right side is filtering with the proper amount of records. We now take what we've learned previously in the other examples and we implement it here. And what we'll do is we'll build an HFilter here. And when we select a record, we'll do a row selection and we'll actually call that procedure or the initialization of the table. So in either case, whether we link a one-to-one and have it displayed in the one table, which actually didn't take any lines of code, or we do a link table where it's a one-to-many where we have two tables, it takes 2 lines of code, it becomes where do you put the code and how do you make that work. We also have looper functionality, and loopers are similar to tables in that they display records, but they also can contain controls as opposed to columns from a table. So the best thing to do is let's look at that. I don't think that's the one I want. I want this is what I want here. Let's select.
Kind of like a shopping cart on a web page.
Right, or a questionnaire
Yep.
that you, yep. And I need to, let's run this. Let's put this out on SQL now. If I go to, let me run it from here. because I know where it's at. Okay, we now have 2 records here, and I want to view the looper, and so this now becomes the looper. And so in the context of this, where the 10 is at, that is a static control, static text. General is a static. Down on the next line, 20 is static, Mercury, that's a static. And the 3 checkboxes, and then a text entry field and a button. And actually every single row has got the same controls on there. It's just at runtime, based on whatever my criteria is, I can hide controls, I can bold controls, I can change any of the attributes. The difference between a looper and a table, and let me just quickly show that, is we have a table, and you'll notice that we have columns. Every piece of data or field that we have is just a column. When we have a looper, it's this one here, our looper basically is every attribute that we need to reference is a column. So it's not a one-for-one with data, it's just a one-for-one with properties of a control that we're manipulating. Whether it's a visible property or a bold property, we have to create a column for that. We talked about generic building browse tables, and so I just want to quickly show what that looks like. If you remember, we ran this example before, and I just grab my fields, and then this is really the code that it takes to do that. Not much, build browsing table. But what we'll do in our examples is we'll actually split that out into procedures, a local procedure where you can see how we can just pass the values, again, by val or by reference, whether they're optional, or we can make a global procedure that we can call from anywhere in the application. The other thing that I wanted to go through was table cell highlighting, and if we just wanted to change the cell color, this is what we do here. And so we actually, the first parameter in the square brackets, that 5, that's the row, and the next one is the column. So it's pretty simple to do that. But if we run that at, we let the user change that at runtime, we actually would, let's see if that's right. Table display. Let me just move over to this procedure. No. I'm just trying to see where I've got my compile in here. And I don't, so let me move, at least I'm not finding it. Let me move over to my creating the rules. Oh, we can do this here. I'm sorry, I'm just looking in the wrong place. We're still here. Here's how we compile. We do an execute process, which we talk about in the class, how you can execute a process, whether it's a procedure or another control. We actually do the compile up here first. We create a procedure, we execute it, we get a result back, and then we act upon that. We also can, I think the last thing that I wanted to look at or show you, and it's kind of a bonus that we've just added into the examples, in fact it's not even released yet, but it will be this week, is we've extended all the functionality of doing an HList file from the analysis, and then the build browse table, and then use the AAF features. So we have a bonus in here, and this is really cool in that sometimes your users will say, hey, I need to get to my data, and I need to export this table, this table, this table. And quite frankly, I get tired of writing those because they're all so similar. So what we've done is we've taken the dynamic build browse table and the query by example and put them all together. And if I do people, there's my column definition from the analysis. And so now I can lay a QBE on top of it. Let's do this, is greater than A. Say done, I'm not going to save it. There's all my records that come back that meet that criteria. I now can export to Word or Excel. And so by just adding this screen into your project, because you're free to reuse these in projects, you now have an export that you can use for any single table that you have in your analysis without having to write any code.
Now that's available in WINDEV, but not necessarily in WebDev, right?
Technically, yes, but I have, because BuildBrowseTable is not available in WebDev. But I do have a workaround for that through code. And so I am able to get the table structure of any table and build my columns on that. So
No,
even though
but
it's done differently, same
that
function.
little icon that you clicked so that I can dump to report or to Excel.
Yeah, that's
Will
available
that?
to us in WebDev.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, it is cool. Yeah. The only stipulation on that is the column needs to be visible within the table. Otherwise, it doesn't export it. Yeah, and that does also bring up a point in that when you create reports, and specifically for WebDev or WinDev, it doesn't matter. In WebDev, you don't have a previewer. It's HTML by default, and you can have that open up on a separate page. You can have it create a PDF. You can have it create a Word document in RTF. So the formats looks very similar. And again, really everything that we've covered in here, and again, this is a high level view because we've done this in an hour and a half, and this really takes 4 days to go through to get a good handle. All this is available in WebDev and for the most part in WinDev also. Certainly the core language features span all 3 products. I think that's it for me with what I wanted to cover.
Man, I tell you, having an overview before a class is so awesome. If my class, if we had what you just gave
I know.
before we ever showed up in your class, man, we'd be really flying.
I know. Little
That's
bits at a time.
fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So Ben clapped his hands. I can bring the chat back here to see if anybody has questions. Brian asked a question, but Ben answered it, so I don't know if you want me to put it up or not, but let's see. This is what he said.
As you're bringing those up, I wanted to make note that I believe on your site and my site, www.sdcdev.net, and I think also, trying to think where else, we have a brochure that you can download from the training examples. It shows the table of contents and a few sample pages.
So do you want to put your offer back up again, and then?
Oh, sure. Nope, I'll be glad to do that. If you go to sdcdev.net and you go to training, there's a button that says make a purchase. It will take you to this screen, and you'll notice that down at the bottom for WX Live we have a sale. I have to apologize. I made a mistake, at least on the screen here. If you see the red arrow where it says 10% off for the next, I'm sorry, the blue arrow. No, it's still the bottom arrow. 10% off 4.2 to 4.7. I'm actually for today and tomorrow, I'm offering 25% off the self-study class. So that makes
these guys
to the people who are attending the WX Live seminar webinar, they can get 25%.
But we need to see real names here. So if your name is not here for real, Glenn doesn't know who you are.
Right.
So whoever IK Jump is, if you could type your name down below, we'll put it up. 25% for the blue one, right?
Nope, sorry. It's going to be, it's 10%, the item 200, the blue one, is 10% off for 7 days through for the St. Louis training. Item number 500 is 25% off for the next 2 days. After that,
the red one should say 25%. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry on that. And then after Sunday, through the 7th, it will go back to 10% for the self-study class. I probably did a good job of confusing everybody on that. But the red arrow is 25% off for 2 days.
Hi, Glenn. Brian's asking, what directory in the Dropbox would I find your manual? If you have a subscription to Glenn's training, he distributes via Dropbox, and that's what Brian is referring to.
Right, and I will actually get in touch with him to make sure that he's got the subscription. But within Dropbox, I send it out, and it comes out as under subscriptions. In fact, I'll call that up right now. Let me see if I can. If I go to Dropbox, it will appear under training,
subscription,
but it will be subscription. That's probably what he'll see as subscription. And we have quite a few people in there, and this past week I think I put 2 updates in there. Next week I'll put the one with the generic export.
Sweet. Okay, so there you go.
I thank you.
And no other questions. We'll just call it a day. Thanks
Great.
again for your. Let's move that out. Move that out. Put your little. Can you move your thing a little to the left? Then yeah, there we go. But thanks for sharing. This is a great overview. It should make people comfortable with the user interface a little more than, say, some of us that just went in there and scared the pants out of us looking at something that was so different.
Yeah, and we take about the last class. I think we took about 3 hours going through the IDE.
And that's helpful, quite helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so you just got Glenn, your great presentation. Thanks. Well, you don't see it, but it's in the Skype. You'll see it later. Okay.
Well, I appreciate the comments. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now.